MOFA Fellow at the EU Center in Taiwan, Department of Political Science at National Taiwan University, relaunching his academic career with several articles on Europe, China, and Asia, and the book on EU Plus in Great Power Competition. He has published 3 books, including Global Multi-Level Governance, European and East Asian Leadership, United Nations University Press. And he has single-authored around 40 academic novels and articles, book chapters, and policy papers. I would also like to mention one small pointer that every speaker will be given 15 minutes, and at the count of say 12 to 13 minutes, I would be ringing a bell so that we are all aware we can keep some time for questions also towards the end. I hope that's okay, Dr. Prado, and I leave it to you to take this ahead. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Well, namaste to India, namaskara to Karnataka, bonjour, buongiorno, guten tag, good day to everybody from Europe and around the world. My deepest gratitude to MCES, especially Professor Neeta, but also to her wonderful group for having me here today in session 6 as a chair and later in session 9 as a panelist for other discussion. I'm humbled by the knowledge gathered by this conference yesterday and today, especially since I'm not an expert on higher education institutions from the inside. I look at higher education more from the outside as an important growing element in international relations. And I'm thrilled to interact with you because you'll be presenting many interesting aspects of this topic I've been researching, especially in the past. Now I'm retaking it a little bit. Without further ado, I think I will introduce each paper speakers one by one. There are 4 papers, 5 speakers, because the first paper has 2 presenters, as you can see. Priya and Neeta, they don't need detailed introductions because they have been involved in this conference for a long time. They are the engine of this conference. And Neeta, of course, is the head of the center and many other things you can see in her CV. And Priya is a rising star in the center. She's doing her PhD on higher education regionalism in Europe and Asia. The topic of their presentation, paper chapter for a book, I suppose, is Overlapping Spaces of Competition, Unraveling Higher Education Regionalism. So please, the screens of the world are yours. You have 13-15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prado, for that introduction. I'll just share my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, Professor Neeta and I are going to present our topic, that's Overlapping Spaces of Competition, Unraveling Higher Education Regionalism. Now, at the onset, let us begin with the argument for this paper. So we've seen higher education regionalism as an era where today the regional phenomenon is unfolding across the world. So it's about increasing cooperation that's emerging between countries in the higher education, of course, in the sector of higher education. But apart from what we see here is that we are trying to, in our paper, trying to locate higher education regionalism in the context of the growing competition in higher education. Parallel to the cooperation that's happening in higher education, we also see that the space is characterized by increasing competition. And this competition, which was earlier happening at the level of institution, at the level of nation, at the level of the national, at the level of global, has in fact entered another arena where we're seeing how the regional level is being employed increasingly by the actors, state, non-state, supranational actors. All of them are employing and mobilizing the regional level in order to compete. So that's, and which is leading to what we say is the intensification of the competition fetish. So this is, let's say, the central argument that we're trying to present in this paper. Let me quickly take you through the flow of the presentation. So of course, we begin with an introduction where we talk about we give you a gist about the competition in higher education. Then we'll delve a little bit on the various theoretical perspectives that has been employed so far to study and to examine the process of competition in higher education. We then move on to the phenomenon that itself is unfolding, the new regional imaginaries that are of higher education. Then take you to the discussion on what we term as the overlapping spaces of competition. Then to the conclusion and reflections. So, as we also mentioned earlier, that our attempt here was to understand this increasing competition in higher education. So if you look at the literature on competition in higher education, it is deemed by scholars as the impact of globalization. Today, higher education institutions are increasingly competing for various kinds of positional goods. It could be in the form of research grants, in the form of publications, in the form of trying to climb the ladder of global rankings or attracting international students and stuff. So these are the various kinds of some of the positional goods that higher education institutions are trying to compete for. And the competition is also unfurling at different levels. The competition in higher education itself is multi-level, in the sense that it's happening at the institutional level, it's happening at the national and at the global level. In this paper, we specifically discuss how this competition has taken to another level, and that's the level of the region. Between nations, when we see this competition, it is seen as the race for influence, where countries or nations are increasingly employing higher education as an instrument to influence or push their own political, economic, and cultural agendas. This is also characterized and defined by scholars as the knowledge race, as a reputation race. And what we see is that as an impact of globalization, this competition in higher education has brought about the birth of the ranking consciousness, which means that today increasingly the idea of global ranking, ranking systems are linked to the global competitiveness of higher education. And the nature of this race, or this knowledge race, this influence is competitive, as we discussed. It's multiplayer, that is, we have multiple actors apart from the state, the institutions, the transnational actors, the supranational actors, and it's also happening, therefore, at multi-level. And that means it's happening at different levels. The issue of competition, we agree that it's important for two particular reasons. One is the dramatic increase or the intensification of competition that we see in higher education. Secondly, it's also the changing nature and the level of competition that we see unfolding. That's the reason why it is very important for higher education scholars to unfold the issue of competition at more depth. And we see different types of competition even in higher education. We see positional competition, social competition, economic competition, and of course, let's say the latest entrant is a geopolitical competition, which is also the, let's say, highlight of this paper. And all this competition in higher education is in fact leading to what scholars like Naidu have termed as competition fetish. That it's competition is seen as an unorthodox element in the entire higher education realm, which is transforming the entire higher education sphere. And as a result of this intense competition, we see that the entire global competition is witnessing a spatial reconfiguration. It's moving one step ahead from what was national global to what we term as the global scale. So the global basically is drawn from global regional, where as we earlier argued, that this competition in higher education is moving to another level, that's the global level. This global level, you could see, is more, let's say, fluid, yet very dynamic. And the space is it's the level where we see the intersection of the region and the globe, in the sense that actors are utilizing or employing the regional level for competition, but at the same time, while they're using or mobilizing the regional level, the aspirations are global in nature. Therefore, you see the intersection of the globe and the region here, or the global and the regional interests here. As I said, the competition is mobilized through the regional space, while they vie for global recognition. So in one sense, you could see that in higher education regionalism, it's about countries or nations coming together, collaborating, cooperating with each other at the regional level. But at the same time, it's their purpose, or the end purpose of this collaboration is, in one sense, we could see that it's to compete with other regions. So it's seen, so this higher education regionalism in fact is deemed as a response to the global competition in higher education. So global competition in higher education, in fact, we also see the other way around, that it is enabling or rather catalyzing the entire higher education regionalism process. If you actually look at this, look at the literature on higher education regionalism thus far, it's been discussed numerously in terms of, when you see the theorization of it, you see the employment of regionalism theories or regional integration. In our paper here, we are trying to slightly differ or depart from that, from those theoretical standpoints, and locate the birth or the emergence of higher education regionalism from the point of view of the global competition in higher education. So the various perspective overview of the literature that discusses how the competition in higher education has been theorized. So one is, of course, the neoliberal perspective, which discusses how higher education is increasingly interlinked to the market. So here is where you talk about the commodification, the massification of higher education itself. The second perspective, popular perspective employed, is the political economy perspective, where the focus is on the competitive relations that nations or countries have amongst each other, where they're trying to compete for global positioning in higher education. And the third perspective is the institutional perspective, which basically speaks about how higher education institutions are increasingly emerging as organizational actors, as actors who have their own respective interests. So these are the various, let's say, theoretical perspectives that literature review enabled us to look at. And all these perspectives is what we see is very much linked to this world-class university narrative, the WCU narrative, which is unfolding. Countries, higher education institutions, all of them vying for the global rankings. And this competition in higher education is also seen as a form of governance, which means that it's leading to the reconfiguration of the governance within higher education, wherein we see new scales of governance within higher education emerging, which we termed as the global space. And this global space we see is a site for both competition and collaboration, competition and cooperation among the actors. This is what we also term as competitive cooperation, in the sense that countries are now collaborating with each other in specific regions, but their agenda or objective in one sense is to compete with other regions in the realm of higher education. And this is also increasingly fueled by the emergence of the supranational actors like the European Union, the ASEAN, the African Union, all of which are leading higher education regional initiatives in their respective regions. So this leads us to the few discussion on the entire regional imaginaries of higher education, where we discuss higher education regional basically as a consequence of two dynamics, wherein one was, of course, the very proliferation of regional cooperation in almost every sector. So even higher education seems to have regional cooperation or integration has entered the realm of higher education. And the most popular case, of course, of the higher education regional phenomenon is the Bologna process. But it's not the only one, because you see such coordinated efforts happening or developing in other parts of the world. We can see that unfolding in Southeast Asia, Central Asia. One of the reasons, I think just 2 months ago, Central Asian Higher Education Region Declaration was signed by 5 countries in Central Asia. We see that happening in Eurasia, in Africa, in Latin America. So there's no part of the region of the world that's actually left where such higher education regional efforts are not unfolding. And if you actually look very carefully at the literature on higher education regionalism, you see a diverse lexicon of terms. Some characterize it as regionalism, as regional integration, as regional cooperation, regionalization, interregionalism. But what is important here is that within higher education discourse, territoriality has always been a very problematic concept, in the sense that we see higher education institutions wanting to be, or seeing themselves as autonomous institutions, independent actors, while they are rooted in their own national, let's say, regulatory frameworks governed by the state regulations. At the same time, they have their aspirations for the globe. So you see they are caught up in this various nexus. And adding to that existing nexus is the emergence of the regional level, where higher education now is increasingly intertwined with the regional dynamics. So this is the complexity with which regionals work. They operate in overlapping territories, managing activities in the global, in the national, in the local, and of course now, we also see them entering or pushed to the regional level. And there's also enough literature that talks about how the region is a very important space, and how increasingly the idea of global competitiveness or competitiveness of the national economy is also linked to the competitiveness of the regional economy. So engagement at the regional level is not only because they want to enhance their global competitiveness and become more competitive, but it's also seen as an effective, let's say, sphere to respond to challenges and demands collectively. Yes, higher education thus becomes a very important sector through which issues of global competitiveness is addressed. So I think we quickly take us to the discussions. In the traditional sense, if you see regional integration from a political point of view, it was basically regional integration was seen traditionally as a means to achieve economic development. However, today there is a massive shift where we see countries increasingly mobilizing the regional space and linking it to the global competitiveness of their own economies. And this was also something that we could see was visible in the case of Europe. What started off as a higher education reform, Bologna process, has now expanded. With the Lisbon strategy of 2000, of course, we see higher education being increasingly linked to Europe's economy and its position as a competitive leader, a competitive economy. So the case of Europe was one example. The European experience also tells how a regional level is employed by these actors for attracting resources for excellence in teaching and research. We also see that through the regional space, by collaborating at the regional level, they are able to make themselves as a region more visible and more competitive at the global level. At the same time, at the regional space becomes a very important, let's say, level where the actors are able to influence their own policy decision or push their own, let's say, national agendas and transform or shape the regional interest or policies. Similarly, in our paper, we also looked at the Asian and the African regional experience, especially with higher education. And if you look at very carefully, especially the Asian and African experiences, they began their entire, let's say, regional initiative in higher education by trying to enhance the quality of education. And this is something that we also see, as I was just mentioning earlier, Central Asian higher education region, which is the, let's say, the newest entrant in the entire realm of higher education regionalism. Kahiya, the Turkestan Declaration of 2021 actually signed, these countries came together and signed up for the creation of a Central Asian higher education region. And very clearly in that Turkestan Declaration, you could see visibly the elements where they want to increasingly enhance their own national economy through higher education. So you see these kind of, let's say, dynamics as a consequence of this increasing competition also reflected in other regional initiatives. Similar efforts we saw in Africa. Again, initially the African Union or the regional initiatives, higher education initiatives in Africa was concerned with addressing issues of access and resources. But later on, we see as the African regional initiative in higher education unfolded, many more, you could see diversity of policy agendas. And so their concern was to collectively and regionally address the issues of quality, issues of recognition, excellence in teaching and research, and much more. And this is also synonymous. You could see that in the initiatives that they developed. For example, the African Quality Rating Mechanism, AQRM, is almost like it's not exactly a ranking, their own African ranking, let's say, setup, but similar to one where they're basically wanting to assess and create their own ranking positions to assess the quality of higher education in Africa. At the same time, we also see the influence of the competition in higher education, when we see that even African Union has gone ahead and created something like the African Citation Index. So research, you see a shifting focus of teaching and research and quality and all these issues are now moving away from the national agenda to the regional agenda. But then one, of course, needs to exercise a lot of caution when we examine these regional phenomena. What we see is that many a time these countries tend to be, let's say, regions tend to be struggling between channeling resources, that is, whether to direct them to building world-class universities. For example, if you actually look at the policy documents of African higher education region, the Arusha Convention, it indeed talks about creating world-class universities. At the same time, they are met with other kinds of issues, that's issues of quality education, providing quality education to all. So major challenge is that if there's a fear that these, let's say, other regions or the other regions of the world might just tend to replicate existing models of existing higher education regional models, and without taking into consideration the regional, national, and the local, let's say, context. This brings us to the conclusion where we look at, it's important, we looked at the impact of course, we looked at the impact of growing competition, but it's also very important to consider the consequences of this impact. And what we see is that scholars have looked at the impact or the consequence of growing competition leading to more and more inequality. And of course, it's also resulting in academic managerialism, especially when you see it from the point of view of the neoliberal imaginary in higher education. And instead of let's say looking at it as solutions, what we see is that this emergence of competition to another level, or the emergence of the colonial space, is actually intensifying the existing competition fetish, which is a very, let's say, worrying development for all of us. And higher education regionalism, in fact, seems to be contributing to it, where it is creating these overlapping spaces of competition, intensifying the competition. And this seems to be worrying because it's here what we see, higher education is losing its, let's say, noble focus, and we see the emergence of geopolitical interest entering the realm of higher education. Positive developments, however, despite all the worrying, let's say, concerns that we have with in the direction at which higher education regionalism is unfolding, is the positive bright spots here you could see are the interregional initiatives. We also see simultaneously, as much as these regional initiatives are developing in their own silos, we also see interregional cooperations also happening. For example, the EU share, for example, where EU and ASEAN together are collaborating on bringing forward some, or collaborating for some interesting agenda. So this, I think we'll stop at this, and if there are any questions, we'll be happy to take forward.
Great, excellent. I do hope there are many questions, because your presentation was very, very nice, very broad. So I'm sure many people in the audience would like to know more about a number of aspects. But I understand from your side in Manipal, you'll be collecting questions and then passing them to me at the end. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Very good. So without further ado, I introduce the second paper, Ms. Arundhati. She's also a member of the MCES there in Manipal. She's a younger rising star. She's doing her master's, and her topic deals with an intriguing concept. I would like to know more about it. Maybe at the end I have a chance to ask a question. Knowledge diplomacy. Diplomats deal with everybody. So I would like to know, I think most people would like to know, what do you mean by knowledge diplomacy in bringing the North-South divide? North-South is a concept from decades ago, but still quite used. I hope you bring us to new meanings regarding that concept. Okay, the screens of the world are yours again.
Thank you, Mr. Prado. Hello, everyone. So my topic of my presentation is the scope of knowledge diplomacy in bridging the North-South divide. So to give a brief introduction, contemporary diplomacy is characterized by many new actors and new issues, and there is a shift from a state-based approach to a multi-actor approach, and higher education institutions are emerging as key players due to this. but there are disparities between the global north and the global south in knowledge production, and there is a need to reassess such traditional hierarchies of knowledge. And fostering partnerships between the global north and south can be instrumental in transforming the existing system, as well as to address global challenges. So knowledge diplomacy could be beneficial in addressing these issues. So first of all, the North-South divide in knowledge production. So countries of the global north, they tend to be former colonial powers, they have strong economies and institutional structures, whereas countries of the global south are former colonies with weakened economies and institutions, and at most times they're compelled to depend upon the north for financing their research initiatives. And knowledge production and dissemination are dominated by northern institutions, and many studies show that the global north has a dominating role in authorship while analyzing publications in English, as many of these journals from the global north are edited by northern academics. So this gap in knowledge production has been widened due to the increasingly mobile nature of Western conceptions, as the direction of knowledge is, the flow of knowledge is usually from the global north to the global south, and scholars from the global north are considered to be authoritative voices, while the role of southern scholars is usually limited to providing empirical data. And southern researchers are often considered to be the weaker partners in collaborations and are perceived to be having limited competencies and skills. But today, northern partners are much more aware of such negative effects and are showing willingness to change. But the already existing gap between the north and south, which includes links to the international scientific community, laboratory facilities and equipments, remains to be an obstacle. And this also shows the increasing relevance of track 2 diplomacy and knowledge diplomacy in addressing various global challenges. So to give a brief introduction of track 2 diplomacy, Joseph Monville defined it as the unofficial, informal interaction between members of adversary groups or nations, which aims to develop strategies, influence public opinion, and organize human and material resources in ways that might help resolve the conflict. And it became popular due to the need to focus on global issues. And examples of track 2 diplomacy can be environmental diplomacy, science diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and of course, knowledge diplomacy. So track 1 diplomacy refers to all the official governmental diplomacy. Track 2 describes all the other activities that occur outside official government channels. So coming to knowledge diplomacy, the concept of knowledge diplomacy was initially used in the field of international relations and political science, and was focused on intellectual property rights since the 1980s. But this concept has expanded to international higher education as well. So globalization affected both internationalization of higher education and international relations, and convergence is now visible. And knowledge diplomacy is a two-way reciprocal process, and 3 dimensions were identified, which includes higher education and training, which includes formal, informal, and lifelong learning, research for the generation, use, and sharing of knowledge, and finally, innovation. Certain key characteristics of the concept has also been identified, which includes the diversity of actors and partners, the focus on higher education, research, and innovation, the recognition of different motives, and the mutual but different benefits. And it's based on negotiation, collaboration, cooperation, and it also includes different levels of collaboration. And it's also beneficial in addressing a common set of issues. And of course, it also builds and strengthens the relations between and among countries. Now, we see that along with an increased rate of student mobility, there has been an increase in joint and double degrees, creation of academic networks, and the framework of knowledge diplomacy focuses on how internationalization of higher education can be used to promote global harmony. And it could also make use of the expertise of academics to address challenges, global challenges. And knowledge diplomacy tends to be confused with other terms such as science diplomacy. And science diplomacy used to consider only hard sciences and may not take into consideration disciplines such as social sciences or humanities. So you can say that knowledge diplomacy can be more inclusive, and this increased significance of HEIs in diplomacy can also have an impact on the existing gap between the global North and South. So how can knowledge diplomacy bridge this divide between the North and South? Knowledge diplomacy can be beneficial in order to recognize and in order to work to prevent and rectify the existing power imbalances in international partnerships. It can ensure a fair distribution of resources as relationship is based on cooperation and collaboration. And knowledge diplomacy takes up a bottom-up approach in comparison with the traditional forms of diplomacy, which is primarily top-down. And HEIs drive knowledge diplomacy and limits the involvement of state, which in turn creates a level playing field. And such collaborations can also provide Northern researchers various opportunities to relook at their research methods and engage with more diverse cultural contexts. Knowledge diplomacy is based on negotiations, so it could be useful for developing and promoting more equal and balanced collaborations. And university-to-university collaborations, which include student and staff mobility, curriculum overhaul, and partnerships, can also further the concept of knowledge diplomacy. And traditionally, the mobility of students and scholars have been from the global South to the North, but a reversal has been noticeable as more people are preferring universities in China, South Korea, and so on. So Asian universities are currently more engaged in internationalization initiatives, and this shift in the pattern of academic mobility could also play a significant role in strengthening the position of the global South and thereby reducing the knowledge gap. An example could be the fostering multilateral knowledge networks of transdisciplinary studies to tackle global challenges project, which included universities and institutions in Vietnam, Thailand, Germany, Austria, and Czech Republic. And it was a response to the need for rethinking knowledge production frameworks. The project was able to engage academic colleagues from Southeast Asia and the European Union in dialogue to talk about the different power asymmetries existing and the impact on knowledge production. And these projects show that there is potential for increased engagement between India and the EU as well. Universities can play a major role in furthering India-EU engagements in the field of higher education. Many initiatives are already in place, such as the Global Initiative of Academic Networks and the Scheme for Promotion of Academic and Research Collaboration in order to attract international researchers. Some of the main areas for collaboration between EU and India are bilateral agreements, research mobility schemes, and so on. And the EQUIP project, the EUIndia Platform for the Social Sciences and Humanities project, which was under the 7th Framework Program, was a network established in 2014 and includes 20 organizations from 15 European countries and India. The project tried to identify challenges and opportunities for better collaboration and to strengthen the relationship between EU and India. The project was able to identify that there was an increase in international co-publication. And they also identified the funding for social sciences and humanities in India was very low, and they reached out to non-governmental funders. The project was able to strengthen the collaboration between EU and India, especially in the field of social sciences and humanities. The EU Horizon 2020 program has also been very beneficial, as many collaborations in the field of, as there were many collaborations in the field of natural sciences and social sciences. EU-India Strategic Partnership, a roadmap to 2025, also states that there would be efforts made for achieving two-way balanced mobility and training of researchers through increased cooperation in the Mary Skłodowska-Curie actions and the Horizon Europe, as well as the India's Visiting Advanced Joint Research Program. There are also plans for an implementing arrangement between the European Commission and the Indian Council for Social Science and Research for strengthening cooperation between India and EU in the field of social sciences and humanities. So, successful projects like these show that there is immense potential for effective and mutually beneficial collaborations between India and EU, and there should be increased focus on knowledge diplomacy. So coming to the conclusions, in today's globalized and interdependent world, international higher education, research, and innovation can play a major role in strengthening relations between countries and also responding to some of the global challenges that we're facing. But the existing power hierarchies have been a constant obstacle in the generation of knowledge, and which has led to this this knowledge divide. And knowledge diplomacy may be able to provide more opportunities to bridge this North-South divide and create new frameworks of knowledge production. And there have already been efforts made for increased cooperations between India and EU, which has shown positive results and which could also open doors for further collaborations. And that would be the end of my presentation. And these are my references. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Arundhati. That was also very broad and interesting. I hope the audience asks questions. Now I pass to the third paper. He's the only man presenting today in session 6, the only person who is not in Manipal, but I understand he has been working in MAHE, MCES for a few years, right, before moving up to Punjab, exactly to the Chitkara Spaak Center for Multidisciplinary European Studies. Sounds wonderful. Perhaps if you have half a minute, you can tell us a bit about it. But okay, we are all looking forward to your papers. The title is, to your paper, the title, The Role of Higher Education in the EU Development and Cooperation Policy. So the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, César. Okay, so I will start with my paper, and then at the end I can say about the Spaak, okay? Because 15 minutes is a very big challenge, but I try to make a very compact presentation. Can you actually see my screen? I can go?
Yes.
1 second. I have some obstacle. Okay, it is going on by himself, but I think that I can manage. Okay, so I will just briefly introduce the content of this presentation. So the first goal is to introduce the correlation existing between higher education and donors countries. The second point is to reflect critically about what is the European Union development and cooperation initiative in the field of higher education in third countries, and then maybe draft some preliminary conclusion. Okay, so I can move forward. I hope that my system will allow me to go forward. Okay. So this is what we see every time that we speak about development and cooperation in developing country. Basically, when we think about this, we basically always see image of children. Why? Because historically, development and cooperation aids in Africa, Asia, South America, has always focused on primary and secondary education. Now, what has actually changed in the last 20 years? In the last maybe 20 years since the 2000, it has been an acknowledgement from the, basically from the actually Bretton Woods institution that the actually development and cooperation initiative has to be enlarged also to the higher education. Now, this one, why? So what has been acknowledged is that we are actually moving to a new actually phase of a new phase that is actually marked by technological advancement. What does it mean? This means that after 20 years, 30 years, we're gonna have a lot of AI, so actually robot machine. And what is now done by the low skilled labor force will not be there. So when we see about the actually data, I had actually look, and I was very actually surprised on seeing how few persons have the opportunity to study in the actually university. So if we see Angola 10%, Burkina Faso 8%, this is actually Africa. So if we see in here the actually trend, the least actually developing country, they have a gross enrollment ratio of around 10%, while country who are in transition has a gross enrollment rate of around 20-25%. Okay, on the opposite side, we see Canada with 59, the actually US with 75. So we have a huge gap. So as some actually commenter has actually noted, we need to internationalize, but we also need to build higher education. And if we see the case of the sub-Saharan Africa, this is definitely the case. But also if we see India, we can expect that this actually figure gonna go up. Now is the maybe 27% after, hopefully after maybe 20 years, it's gonna be the 50%. Okay, so moving forward, why until now almost all the actually focus went to the primary education and to the not actually secondary education. So in the first actually place, primary and secondary education are instrumental to access to the higher education. If you are not making your 10 years of actually school, or actually 12 years or 11 years, you cannot access to the university. So it is a logical steps. If you need to make the third floor, you must make the first floor and the second floor. And another thing, and this is more interesting maybe, is, and this also a bit more pessimistic, is that in the developing country, national policy makers, they do actually prefer immediate impact. So if you invest in primary and in the secondary education, is less expensive and you can achieve some output for the next election, in a nutshell. And at the same time, from the wealthy country, the taxpayers love to see a picture of smiling children. So that's why it's more easy to sell to the actually national taxpayers that we are helping the children of Africa. And of course, that one is more easy for the citizen to accept. At the same time, investment in the higher education, despite they are on the long-term periods, and despite the amount of money has to be higher, so the funds invested has to be higher, in the first place, they are essential to train teachers for the primary and secondary school, mostly for the secondary school. We know that teach in the school is a very hard job, is time consuming, it takes a lot of energy, and you must be skilled. And of course, in Africa or in Asia or in any place of the planet, we need good tertiary education for the school teacher. On the second point, of course, we are moving toward a knowledge economy. So we need labor we need people who are skilled in Africa as in Europe or elsewhere in the planet. Another thing that is essential now, if in Africa, in Asia, the public servants, or as well in Europe, everywhere, we need skilled public servants which manage crucial sector in our life, like health or the state at all. Okay, we know that public management is something extremely complex and need a good higher education. Of course, empower women. In here we have, I'm the only man and I'm extremely happy. Why? Because higher education is the excellent way to say to the man, sorry, I don't want to cook at home. I have to work. I have my career. And last but not actually least, an investment in higher education means to tackle inequality, to favor civic engagement, and to promoting good governance. Okay, now let's move to EU and development and cooperation policy. Now we need a prelude. The money that EU give to third country scholars and to third country university is not equal to the EU development and cooperation policy in the field of higher education. Let's see why. I'm gonna add a bit of pepper. Basically, what I find out is that despite we always think that actually program as Erasmus Plus, Horizon 2020 aims to help scholars from third country. The actually reality might also be a bit different if we see beyond the surface. Okay, so what I wrote is that the EU funds targeting higher education in the developing country has to balance the need of attracting talent. Okay, so the funds of the European Union, mostly under the Horizon 2020, as a primary goal to attract talent, okay? And on the other side, to balance this brain drain or this potential brain drain, the EU found, these are from the development and cooperation policy of the EU, need to support higher education outside the European Union. So let's see what is maybe from where I get this information and where and how I got to this conclusion. Basically, I have analyzed the cornerstone of the European Commission when it comes to Horizon 2020 and Erasmus Plus, the strategic communication called the actually European higher education in the world, and as output, the first interest and the first goal of this fund is to attract talent from third country. Okay, now this is of course we can see this as something as maybe negative, but in the actually reality is a necessity. Why? Because the actually European Union is losing competitiveness when it comes to the competition with the US, mostly in terms of actually research. So it is something done to enhance the competitiveness of the European academia and hence of the actually European industries. Then as second goal, we have the promotion of the actually European Union as soft normative power. And the third point is the actually promotion of capacity building initiative. I move forward because I think that I start to be short of time.
3 minutes.
Okay, so let's see what is based on development and cooperation policy. So I will not cover the actually Marie Curie because that is basically aimed to attract talent. What it has been done so far. So the actually first thing that has been done is the so-called Erasmus for Africa, that is called the Intra-African Academic Mobility Scheme. This in line with what has been actually saying earlier, it is actually promoting the African regionalism. Until now, it has been given 1,800 scholarship for a bit less than 80 African higher education institutions. The budget is around a bit less than 10 million per year. So the budget is not huge, okay? And then what is the key initiative for the development and cooperation policy for the European Union addressed and is truly global initiative is the capacity building. So basically the capacity buildings aim to modernize, internationalize, increase accessibility of the higher education in the developing and transition country. Until now, these are the data. The fund that has been allocated for the last 6 years is a bit lower than 1 million euro. 1 billion. So we are really speaking about a very consistent budget. Now, where this money has been invested, unfortunately, what it has to be noticed that only the 6% went to the less developed country. So if we see where this money has gone, and also makes sense, I mean, in here I'm not being judgmental, but I'm just trying to emphasize how it's hard to balance the real politics with the development and cooperation policy. Most of the money went to the neighborhoods, most of the money went to Asia, including China, and less than the 6% went to the sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, and part of this 6% went to South African university, who are not the most poor on the non-African continent. So the conclusion that the approach of the European Union through academia in the developing country seems to be contradictory. I told seems because in the reality it is a balance. You have from one side the need of attracting talent, and attracting talent means to increase global brain drain. From the opposite side, EU, and is probably one of the few entities who is actually trying to help university from the south to build new capacity. Okay, so another conclusion that maybe EU is overcommitted, not in the terms of money, but in terms of geography and topics. Basically, instead of focusing the funds in few target country and for few issue, they tend to give funds to all the possible country over the all possible issue. So as output, the outcome are not always very satisfactory. Another things that I would add is very important that the European university that want to commit to this capacity building initiative, they don't have enough incentive to do so. And the last point, which I think is of general interest, that I found a very interesting gap in the literature. In Erasmus, there is almost nothing. So this is something. These are not conclusion, are only the first steps, I would say, toward a further investigation. Thank you so much. And then, César, if I can add one sentence, I'm in Punjab, so I'm very interested into party politics. Okay, so I'm political. Okay, so party politics at the European Union level, so transnational party politics. But I literally donate my last 8 years of life to try to build Indo-European initiative in different areas. Okay, so I'm a person that 4 years ago was saying the future of the international actually relation is health, and people were laughing at me. Then it has come COVID, and I was laughing. Okay, so to try to look beyond. Okay, so for the last 80 years, I tried to help my colleague from Europe and from India to build a common platform or more platform. Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, excellent, Stefano. Greco actually has been working with many EU-funded projects. He's been supervising quite a few, and I hope you do keep supervising more. And the whole audience should be paying attention to a new comprehensive funding system approved by the European Union. It's called Global Europe, and I think is amounting to around 80 billion euro for the whole world, for all kinds of issues, of course, but I think it's a qualitative increase compared to previous years. Do you want to say anything else about that, Stefano?
The only things that I want to say, only two input. One, it is calling to the next speaker, Brexit. Because when I say that EU need to attract talent, we have a new issue that is that the most important actually university from the actually European Union were the one in the actually UK. And the second point is that with COVID, the actually member states has generated a public deficit that is very, very important. So the key question mark is how much the EU voters will be happy to give money to country outside Europe? Question mark.
All right, well, well noted. Now the last presentation by Medini. She's also working there at the Manipal Center for European Studies. She's pursuing her PhD, and her approach is more traditional, let's say. She's working on internal politics, party politics in the UK. Actually, is no longer a member of the EU, but of course, is very well connected to the EU. And in India. So it's also a very interesting presentation because she's comparing two countries in two different parts of the world, which I believe have not been compared before in the field of higher education. But the floor is, the screen is for Medini to tell us details about all this. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Prado. Let me just share my screen. Right. So thank you for the introduction, Dr. Prado. And like you said, I'll be talking about Brexit, universities, and the impact it has had on the process of internationalization. And we'll be looking at two major countries who've had historical relations in the past, India and the UK. But just to give you some context, that the aim of internationalization has always been to provide an open, cosmopolitan, global education. But what we have been seeing is that not only under authoritarian regimes, but also populist regimes increasingly today in the West and the East, we have been seeing that they are introducing policies that have stalled the process of IHE. This paper, all I'll be looking at is relations between India and the UK from 2013 to 2018. In 2013, we saw that there were several visa restrictions imposed by the Cameron government to stop the abuse of the UK immigration system. Like I was talking, I will be talking about the relations between India and the UK from 2013 to 2018. And in 2018, we see that post the Brexit vote, there'd be an opening up of broader borders to international students, especially students from India. Just to give you some idea what were the 2013 restrictions, the migration policy at the time stated that they wanted to retain only the best and the brightest international students, and like I said earlier, to stop the abuse of the UK immigration system and as well to maintain the prestige of the UK education centre. Like Stefano said just a few minutes earlier, that the UK had a large number of universities that attracted many, many students from within the EU as well as outside the EU. So the 2003 restrictions as well, 2013 restrictions as well, were very particular, and they emphasized on the fact that there was no cap on international students. But at the same time, what we see is that there was a decrease in the number of visas that were granted to Indian nationals. Additionally, in 2013-14, which was that 4 out of 5 students did not receive any scholarship or fee waiver to cover their tuition fee. But again, as the UK has been attempting to emphasize repeatedly that they are anxious to recruit and host Indian students, provided they pay their way. Now, we see that this has been a very important factor in the relation between UK and India, and even when they're attracting international students, the main purpose of has been to tap on the kind of financial gain. In 2011 and 12, we see that about 3.9 billion pounds were spent by international students on tuition fee, and 6.3 billion pounds in on living expenses. So the perception towards Indian students, especially pre-Brexit or between 2011 to 2015 at least, has been that the Indian students over time illegally stay in the UK and take up the few skilled jobs excluding the British people. This is something that had been repeated again during the Brexit referendum as well. I will be talking about that shortly. But yet again, we see that the UK still wanted to tap on the financial gain by these international students and close the Tier 4 route. They opened up other routes, such as the Tier 2 general route, where graduate students could apply for skilled jobs on completion of their program. Even PhD students could stay for up to 1 year and work in the skilled employment sector or set up as an entrepreneur. And also, even exchange students could stay and search for employment on completion of the course. So like I said, the perception of international students has been that they will be the cause of unemployment among the British people. And what was perceived Indian students or students from the Southeast Asian countries in 2013. Back in 2016, this was understood as the students from the EU or from the European higher education area were understood to be these students who would take away British jobs. So while on the one hand, we see that during the Brexit referendum, the Brexiteers or the populist actors propagated a clean Brexit. What do we mean by a clean Brexit again was that they wanted to cut all their ties with the EU. They wanted to take back the control of their borders, of their industries, and this also included the higher education sector. But this was not in favor of the UK universities, the UK higher education institutions, and they opposed this. The main reason of this opposition was if the UK, as we know now that the UK has exited from all EU-funded programs, and these universities do not receive any more aid, and they did receive heavily from these programs. They did receive monetary gain heavily from these programs. So on the one, so there is a kind of dissonance. There is a financial aspect of this, and as populist movements in the UK urged to break ties with the EU to consolidate or to match up or the kind of financial gain it received from the EU prior to this, they wanted to build stronger relations with their previous colonies. And of course, India did play an important role in this, considering it is the major source of internationally outbound students. So as the UK exited the EU, it also got out of the Erasmus Plus program, where that was the Johnson administration termed as extremely expensive. And this exit was very well calculated, and it was based on statistics, as the UK's Higher Education Statistics Agency states, that in 2019-2020, we see that there was a 17% increase in non-EU enrollments. EU enrollments decreased by 2%, a small number, but again, we're just seeing a gap 1 year. But what was phenomenal is that the enrollments from India doubled in 2019 and 2020. They doubled from something around 27,000 to what we now know as 55,465. Just some more numbers to bolster this sudden increase of Indian students in the UK post-Brexit. Again, in 2016, there were only around 9,000 students, and 2019 that was increased increased fivefold. Even the number of visas granted to Indian students increased threefold, and scholarships offered to Indian students were 291 in 2016 and were to 480 in 2019. So there are two questions that come to mind: how and why? Why this increase of Indian students to the UK, and how was this made possible in light of 2013 restrictions? The how I will be discussing in this slide. We see that there were two policies introduced by the UK government. In 2019, they started with the Future Skills Immigration System that extended the post-study work visa for master's students from absolutely nothing to 6 months, and to that of 12 months for doctoral students. And at the same time, graduate students could apply for skilled work post completion of their course, but also that they could apply from their home country up to 2 years after their graduation. Similarly, in 2020, they introduced a new immigration system, point-based immigration system, and again, it enables students to stay in the UK and search for employment opportunities for up to 2 to 3 years. So from these policies, what we see is that it's probably that the UK is opening its borders. It is being more outward looking and attracting more and more international students, more and more students outside the European Union and from other Commonwealth countries. But a closer look, even at the points-based immigration system, tells you that not much has really changed. The 3 points that I have stated here: the offer from an approved educational institution, proficiency in the English language, and financial sustenance were conditions that were always required, even back in 2013 and even now. The only difference is that in 2013 they used a much more harsher language. For example, what they say as an approved educational institution, that back then was stated as a classified, highly trusted sponsor of the UK border agency. So extremely harsh terms. But today they've become a little more milder in the way they phrase their policies. And this is an attempt to be more outward looking, more open, but not much really has changed for Indian students, at least when they are applying for a UK visa or to study in the UK. Driving this point forth, I'd like to focus on the India-EU Virtual Summit that took place in May 2020. And there were 8 partnerships or MOUs signed by the 2 partners in this summit. Of course, you had the quintessential requirements on trade, innovation, digital technology, telecommunications. But what is important are the last 2 MOUs signed on medical products regulation and pharmacopoeia cooperation. Now, India is among the largest producers of generic drugs and exports almost 25%, and the UK imports about 25% of this. However, since 2018, what we've been seeing is there are increasing complaints with regard to the quality of these drugs. And the UK's FDA sent almost 75 plus letters, out of which with warning letters to the importers, and about half of these were sent to India and China. But there is also very little scientific evidence on this low standard, the low quality, because the rating on a scale of 10, where the EU stands at 7.9, the US at 7.7, India is not very far away at 7 out of 10. So it is important for India to drive these partnerships of this kind towards to ensure that there is more information with regard to its regulations, and to ensure that it can drive forth its medicines and medical products. But the other MOU that is unique in this is the MOU on migration and mobility. Of course, what this stated was that the UK offered the opportunity for 3,000 Indian students to study in the UK in exchange that India takes back its illegal immigrants. Now, the important point here is that while they put a tap on the number of Indian students, they did mention the number 3,000. There was no tap on the number of illegal that was supposed to take back. India had taken an objection to this, and it argued that it was only after establishing that the nationality of the immigrant would it be willing to accept them back. The partnership, of course, just a few phrases from the MOU itself. The partnership is based on the long-standing and historical bonds of friendship to intensify people-to-people exchanges, but at the same time to encourage the legal and orderly movement of students and professional skilled workers, and to prevent immigration abuse. These are extremely key words, and what we see is the UK still talks in a very high-handed manner. That the language used is still that the UK is the beneficiary rather than the beneficent as well through these partnerships. And also what we see is that from this partnership, India has not much to gain except for the brain drain, of course. And it is in direct contrast with the NEP, that is the National Education Policy of 2021, where India takes a stand towards internationalization at home, where it invites students from across the world to come and study from the unique knowledge system of India, to learn from the 24 colors, to learn from the globally renowned world-class institutes. And this is all towards India's aim of becoming a Vishwa Guru. Of course, this is contested, but what I would like to drive is that these two policies seem to be in direct contrast with one another. So just to conclude, of course, there are definitely different incentives for India and the UK for this to sign these partnerships. On the one hand, we see that the UK still has internationalization in mind, and it is driving an economic strain here. It is focusing on the financial gain that it will receive. But for India, it is more about increasing cooperation in pharmacovigilance and medical regulations. But at the same time, what we see is that the motivations for signing these partnerships at the virtual summit are extremely different for the Indian state and the students. Again, like I said, the Indian state is more focused on medical products regulation, whereas for the students, it is the opportunity to learn at these world-class institutes in the UK. And at the same time, it is the opportunity of staying back in the UK as a result of the post-study work visa extension and gain employment opportunities over there. So one question that does arise is that what we see perhaps then is that there are economic interests that are driving internationalization of higher education rather than academic motivations. In yesterday's session, Dr. Hubna and Dr. King did bring this up when they talked about the quasi-marketization of higher education governance. And this is a phenomena that we see taking form slowly and gradually today in the field of internationalization of higher education. And this begs the question of, are we digressing from the conventional idea of IHE? Are we digressing from the idea of providing an open, cosmopolitan, intercultural in education to all that inspire to be global citizens of the world? These are some of my references, and I'd like to end there.
Excellent, Medini, and just on time. So now we move to the Q&A session. I receive a number of questions put in the Q&A area, and they are summarized here in the chat. Maybe you can all see them, but just in case, I'll try to summarize them. The first one or two questions deals with the need of understanding, of getting basic information on the multiplicity of initiatives and actors. The first paper referred to the bewildering number of actors, initiatives, and levels, and they are all competing. Well, often there's much competition, sometimes cooperation. So the common person interested in internationalizing himself, his family, his or her institution is confused. I suppose there is a greater need to communicate this to more interested or potentially interested people through fairs, etc. Maybe some of you would like to comment on this. Otherwise, this might be better answered in the last session, session 9, which is more of a brainstorming session dealing with inclusivity and sustainability. But the question is there for anyone who wants to take it. And there is another question specifically for Stefano Greco. It's about the brain drain and brain circulation. The person suggests that there is not too much of a brain drain from India to Europe or from the south to the north, but there is more of a circulation because after a few years, many of the students who went to the north to study, etc., tend to go back to India, or I would add, go elsewhere. So that's specifically for you. And I have my own question to Neeta, Priya, and perhaps Arundhati. Are you sure that globalization and regionalization, the global and regional levels are increasing a lot? Because globalization was increasing after the Cold War in the 90s and the early 2000s very, very much. But then the economic crisis of 2008, 2009 harmed globalization in many parts of the world. So I think the number of students did not grow as much as in previous decades, and regional schemes also suffer in the past few years. So maybe you can comment on that and try to add something on South Asia. How is regional cooperation in South Asia? What is the potential for SAARC cooperation, India, Pakistan, etc.? Thank you. Yeah, and if there are more questions on time, then we would have a second round of Q&A questions. Thank you. Anyone wants to answer the first one on promoting, disseminating knowledge to the general public? Otherwise, anybody wants to take that question?
Yeah, I think Stefano was to answer this question on brain drain, and maybe I thought I would answer after that. Stefano,
Okay.
would you like to go first?
Okay, so I told that it's a great question. Why? Because we don't know all the alumni of the Marie Curie and Erasmus Plus from India, if they are there or if they are back. So this is what I told. We don't know many things, okay? And this is what I told, that we have a literary gap. That this question, if it's a brain drain or if it's a brain circulation, we don't know, which is nice. I love when I actually don't know something, okay? But what I want to add is one thing. We are speaking about India, no? A person that has made PhD, has went to Belgium, has been there 5 years, and then it has come back. Perfect, can happen. But what I want to ask, let's imagine a person from Burkina Faso that get a PhD, get a nice job in a nice, university in Belgium. But why he has to go back to Burkina Faso? To do what? This is my provocation. Because India is a country that gives you opportunity. But when you go in a country that is the least developed country, to who you go to teach? You go in actually university where you even don't have the lab. Okay? And okay, that's it. This is my answer. Okay, so that we need this answer. So, and okay, thank you so much.
So more than brain circulation, there is brain mobility around networks of knowledge around the world.
And we don't know a lot about this. We don't know the impact of the scholarship that the European Union give, mostly in South Asia. We don't know. Okay, so we don't know if it's we know that brain take the flight, but we don't know which is the final stop.
Okay, very good. Okay, two more questions. Who would like to take the one on disseminating knowledge to the confused public?
I think, Dr. Prado, you asked a question about regional initiatives in South Asia.
Also, yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So we just thought of taking that question. Of course, there's a huge opportunity right now because even in India, even within India, we do not have a higher education qualification framework yet. And that is something to harmonize higher education within India, which is the need of the hour. And we are thinking it, of course, Government of India has already initiated action towards that. But there is always this recommendation, if the entire South Asia can be consulted while this is being developed, so that it can also feed into the neighborhood policy of Government of India. However, there are also a lot of challenges to this, to include some of the neighbors in this entire initiative, and that's also the reason the SAARC did not work very well as it was planned. We have the SAARC expert here along with us attending this, but it did not work. So we cannot imagine that this would also work in case of education. However, at least with the countries in South Asia that India is comfortable working with, if it can make, it can come with initiatives maybe of inviting the Vice Chancellor or having a Vice Chancellor's conference of South Asian universities to begin with. I think there can be an interesting development in terms of regional cooperation in higher education. This is something totally missing here, and India is all eligible to take leadership in this particular part. However, something that has not happened, and we are really looking forward to Government of India initiatives in this direction. Yeah,
I think some initiative was undertaken in the year 2015 when SAARC members met, and there was a New Delhi declaration that was signed. It was one of the first attempts to create or to cooperate in the realm of higher education. But we know that the political relations post 2015 deteriorated to a great extent, and the regional higher education initiative that actually kick-started has almost come to an end. And there is, of course, no political dialogue happening around with at least some of the members. It seems like the entire initiative has come on a standstill. But there was an effort made as well in South Asia.
But I think in the paper also, we also mentioned how this competition fetish can actually affect. So we also are very aware when we are proposing these things about the regionalism in higher education, regionalization of higher education. We are also thinking the minute higher education enters the international relations realm, whether it is going to affect the autonomy of the institutions in any way, because it becomes from actor in international relations, whether that actorness is transferred something completely to a supranational initiative. So that is some kind of a fear, not really fear, but some kind of a discomfort that we should always take into account even before we take the first step. So those things have to keep in mind. And maybe one thing is institutional autonomy that probably every academic would like to defend at any time.
Any more questions? I do not see any here. Any one of you would like to comment or say anything? We still have 5 minutes, so we can close now, or I can ask a general comment maybe to Neeta and the whole center. Oh, there is a hand here. Somebody rose the hand. Sane wants to ask a question, or what is happening, Sane?
Yes, may I present the question now?
Please, to whom?
To Priya. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was just wondering, did you also compare the density of the governance structure and the steering measures implemented or planned for each of the regional frameworks of higher education that you studied? Why am I asking that is because the EU has a notable supranational elements, while others may rely more on intergovernmental components. Thank you.
Yeah. Should I respond? Yeah, Zane, thank you for that question. In fact, I completely understand. We, of course, did not look at the density of governance, but we also made it very clear in the introduction part of our paper itself that these higher education regional initiatives that's unfolding in different regions of the world, they're happening at various capacities, at various levels, and they're, of course, they're very different from each other. So, as you rightly mentioned, in Europe, of course, the EU has played a very instrumental role in the sense that also given that it has these political, let's say, support, power, everything. It's not a similar case in either Africa or in Asia. So you see some, let's say, elements, of course, highly it's intergovernmental, but in other regions of the world, it's also driven by higher education institutions themselves. So you see differences in the form of governance that's emerging in these different higher education regional projects. they are very different in their own approach. So that clarity, of course, we took in the very beginning of the paper itself. Hope to carry that out further.
Very good. We still have 3 minutes, and there is one perhaps last question from Sayantan Mandal. To whom, please?
Yeah, hello. My question is towards basically two presenters. Anybody can answer. One is Priya and Dr. Neeta, and another one is to Arundhati. Basically, it's related to Arundhati's presentation of knowledge diplomacy. Now that we see that this knowledge diplomacy is going on for quite some time, and on the other hand, there is this international, as you said, the fetish for ranking in the first presentation. So how these two things are connected, because I can certainly see that they are connected, but to the extent it is connected, because when the scholarships are provided, they are provided not just to the student, they are also part of this knowledge diplomacy. So how these things are playing a role in, first of all, this blurring the boundaries of national boundaries, at the same time working as a diplomatic move to bring the countries or the countries and the continent together. So if you can explain a little bit more, that would be really great. Thank you.
Well, please, Arundhati, perhaps you want to finish the session?
Yes. So I do believe that when it comes to the field of knowledge diplomacy, there needs to be more discussions on, especially what you just mentioned, the international ranking system right now. For now, I think the value systems that exist, I think something that is discussed a lot in literature related to knowledge diplomacy is how whatever we mentioned, which could be beneficial, could also be problematic in certain situations. So it is a topic that needs to be deliberated more on. And I believe that Professor Neeta can give much more better insights on this.
All right, Mr. Prado, can I go ahead?
Yeah, it's 6 o'clock, but I guess with the venue of MCES, you have 1 or 2 more minutes.
All right, thank you. To answer Dr. Mandal, so generally what happens is there is this thin line between looking at international education in the realm of soft power, within the definition of a soft power, or the way you look at it from knowledge diplomacy. So there's a thin line that separates both of them. It's basically, you can even see it as a theoretical lens with which you see it, because the actions that follow sometimes can actually be on the side of basically exercising soft power. Finally, it's more definitionally different from what happens in knowledge diplomacy. So I have attended this conference on education in Europe in this sense, where the very first statement begins by saying education is on the top of the political agenda. So when that happens, then definitely it is not knowledge diplomacy, but it is using education as a soft power. So when you when it is put under that category, then definitely all these scholarships, all that money that flows in, has a particular agenda and comes with a particular political interest. Okay. But when it comes to definitionally, if you look at knowledge diplomacy, then it is more between the actors. Universities, when they come forward and have it. So it's more bottom up when it comes to knowledge. When it comes to knowledge diplomacy, even definitionally, we see it as when the institutions themselves want to partner and have. But when it is state driven, there is always some kind of a self-interest that is underlying, and that's what happens in probably using it as education as a soft power. I think that I'll just leave you with that. Maybe we need far more deliberation, discussion on that part to get to more detail as to which particular action comes under maybe under soft power as a soft power instrument, and which probably is more of a knowledge diplomacy, where the actors are more important. The universities themselves are more important than the state, though both of them will have to participate together. You need a state support. Even if today I want to have partnership with several universities in other parts of the world, there is need for a state support to that. If there is a restriction on me even organizing a conference or whom I can invite to the conference, then we know that the state kind of a support is needed, definitely, probably being from within the Indian academy. You agree with me on that part for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your presentations and the questions, and for being here today in session 6 my role is finished. I pass the screen to Manipal, and I think they will tell us a bit about the future sessions. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Dr. Prado, and thank you all the presenters for your valuable insights. We conclude this session now, and we will be back at 2:45 India time. That's in another 11 minutes. Thank you.